It was a quiet evening. The city was covered in a soft, gray rain. Streetlights shone like little stars on the wet ground. And somewhere under one of those lights stood a young man named Daniel. He held his umbrella tightly, waiting for a bus that seemed like it would never come. His clothes were wet. His shoes made small sounds in the puddles. But his mind was louder than the rain. Because that evening, Daniel had made a choice. And it was a choice that would stay with him for a very long time. Daniel worked in a small printing shop. It was not a big company. Just a few workers, one old printer, and the smell of paper and ink. He liked his job. He liked helping customers, making designs, and seeing people smile when they picked up their posters or invitations. But money was always a problem. The shop didn't pay much. Daniel lived in a small apartment, cooked simple meals, and sometimes skipped breakfast to save money. He was not lazy. He worked hard, stayed late, and dreamed of one day starting his own small business. But life often felt like a heavy umbrella, something he had to hold up, even when he was tired. That morning, something happened. The boss, Mr. Carter, gave Daniel an envelope and said, "Take this to the bank, please. It's the cash from this week's orders." Daniel nodded, smiled, and said, "Sure, I'll go right now." It was a normal job. He had done it many times before. But when he reached the bank, something unexpected happened. The cashier counted the money, and Daniel noticed something strange. There was more money than usual. He looked at the numbers again. It was about $300 extra. His heart started to beat faster. Maybe Mr. Carter made a mistake, he thought. Or maybe no one would even notice. $300 could pay his rent this month. $300 could mean food for 2 weeks. He stood there, holding the envelope, feeling the rain start outside. It was small, but inside him, something big was happening, a battle. The battle between what is easy and what is right. He didn't take the money then. He finished the deposit, walked out of the bank, and waited for the bus. But his mind was full of questions. What if I just took it? What if I said I never saw it? He'd never know. Then another voice inside whispered, "But you would know." That voice stayed with him. It was quiet, calm, but strong. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The rain grew heavier. He closed his umbrella and looked at his reflection in a puddle. He saw his tired face, his worried eyes, and his simple clothes. And then he whispered to himself, "What does it mean, to be honest when no one is watching?" He remembered a phrase his English teacher once said in class, back when he was trying to learn English in the evenings after work. She had said, "Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one sees you." At the time, he didn't think much about it. It sounded like a good sentence to practice speaking. He even repeated it aloud several times. But now, standing there in the rain, those words suddenly felt alive. He said it again softly, almost like a prayer. Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one sees you. The bus finally arrived. He stepped inside, shaking off the rain, and sat near the window. The world outside looked blurred and soft through the glass. He watched people walking with umbrellas, cars passing, lights reflecting on the wet street. He thought about his life, about how he was trying to improve his English, to sound more confident, to be more open with people. He realized speaking good English wasn't just about words. It was about truth, about learning to express what is real. Maybe integrity and communication are connected. Maybe when we speak honestly, we live honestly too. The bus stopped. Daniel got off near his apartment and walked home through the quiet street. Inside, he sat on the edge of his bed, holding the small notebook where he practiced English sentences. He opened it. On one page, he had written weeks ago, "I want to become a better speaker. I want to speak with confidence. I want people to trust my words." He stared at those lines for a long time. Then he whispered, "If I want people to trust my words, I must also trust myself. He took out his phone and sent a message to Mr. Carter. It said, "Hi, sir. I think there was extra money in the envelope. I deposited all of it, but please check again." He put his phone down. And in that quiet moment, a small peace filled his heart. He didn't know if his boss would thank him or even notice. But he felt something deeper than pride. He felt honest. He felt real. And that, he thought, is what it means to have integrity. The next morning, he received a reply. "Daniel, thank you. You're right, I miscounted. I really appreciate your honesty." Daniel smiled. Just a few simple words, but they meant a lot. He went to work that day feeling lighter, even though nothing about his life had changed on the outside. But inside, something had shifted. It was like a quiet sunrise after a long night. And that was the day Daniel began to understand something powerful, that integrity is not just a word. It's a language of its own. A language you speak through your actions. That evening, after work, he opened his English book again. He read out loud slowly, like he always did. But this time, his voice was different. It was calm. It was steady. It was full of meaning. Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one sees you. He smiled, closed the book, and whispered, "I think I understand now." The rain had stopped outside. The city lights were warm again. And Daniel, sitting quietly in his small room, felt something clear and bright inside him, like light after rain. The days passed quietly after the rain. Daniel continued his work in the small printing shop. Each morning, he unlocked the door, turned on the old printer, and breathed in the smell of paper and ink. It was the same routine, the same sounds, the same little world. But something inside him had changed. He felt more aware of himself, of his words, his actions, and even his thoughts. He tried to speak politely to customers, to smile even when he was tired, and to listen carefully when people talked. He noticed that honesty didn't only live in big moments, it also lived in small choices, in how he spoke, how he worked, how he treated others. One afternoon, a woman came into the shop. She wanted to print some wedding invitations. She looked happy, excited, a little nervous. Daniel smiled and said, "Of course, I can help you with that." They worked together for a few hours. He showed her paper samples, designs, and fonts. Finally, she chose one, a simple, elegant design with gold letters. When Daniel printed the first sample, she said, "Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much." She paid for the order, took the box, and left. But a few minutes later, Daniel saw something under the counter, a small purse. He opened it. Inside, there was cash, some cards, and a little photograph of two smiling people, maybe her and her fiancé. He looked toward the door. She was already gone. The street outside was quiet. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like it. Daniel froze. He felt that same familiar voice whisper inside, "What will you do this time?" It was strange. He had already done the right thing once. He thought integrity was simple: be honest, tell the truth, don't steal. But now another test came, quietly, unexpectedly. A forgotten purse. No one watching. No one would know. He picked it up, turned it in his hands, and thought, she might come back. I'll wait. He waited for 10 minutes. Then 20. No one came. The shop was closing soon. Mr. Carter had already gone home. Daniel was alone. He looked at the purse again. Maybe she would never return. Maybe she didn't even remember where she had left it. And again, his thoughts began to twist like soft smoke. Just a little money could help me. No one would ever find out. I could take a small amount, not all of it. He closed his eyes inside. He remembered the rain. He remembered that quiet evening at the bus stop when he made the right choice. And he remembered how good it felt afterward, not proud, but peaceful. He whispered to himself, peace is better than money. He locked the purse inside a drawer and went home. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing two voices in his mind. One voice said, "You need the money. You deserve a break. Life is unfair." The other voice said, "Integrity is not about what you deserve. It's about who you are." He turned in bed, looked at the ceiling, and thought about his life again. He wanted to grow, to learn, to speak English more naturally, to travel one day. But maybe before learning to speak English better, he needed to learn to speak honestly, with himself. He smiled a little at that thought. Maybe integrity is like language, he whispered. You must practice it every day, or you forget it. The next morning, Daniel came to work early. He placed the purse on the counter, waiting for the woman to return. Around 10 o'clock, the door opened, and there she was, her face full of worry. She looked at him and said quickly, "Oh my God, did I leave my purse here yesterday?" Daniel smiled softly. "Yes, you did. I kept it safe for you." She gasped, her eyes wide with relief. "Oh, thank you so much. I thought I lost everything." She opened the purse and checked. The money was still there. Then she said something that stayed in Daniel's heart for a long time. "You know, I told my fiancé last night, I think the man at the shop was kind. Maybe he'll find it." And he said, "People don't return money these days. But you did. Thank you for proving him wrong." Daniel didn't know what to say. He just smiled and said, "I'm happy you got it back." She left the shop with a bright smile, but Daniel stayed still, watching the door close. He felt something soft and deep inside his chest, not pride, not reward, something else. Clarity. That afternoon, while he was cleaning the printer, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his English teacher, Ms. Evans. She was inviting him to join a small group conversation practice that evening. He almost said no because he was tired, but then he thought, if I can practice integrity, I can also practice English. So after work, he walked to the little community classroom near the park. There were 5 other students sitting in a circle. They were all speaking English, laughing, making mistakes, but enjoying it. Miss Evans smiled when she saw him. "Daniel, so glad you came. Tonight we're talking about honesty and character." He laughed quietly inside. It was a strange coincidence, or maybe not a coincidence at all. He sat down and listened carefully. Miss Evans asked, "What does honesty mean to you?" One student said, "Telling the truth." Another said, "Not lying." Then Miss Evans looked at Daniel. "And you, Daniel?" He hesitated for a second, thinking of the rain, the envelope, and the purse. Then he said, slowly and clearly, "Honesty is doing what feels right, even when nobody is looking." Miss Evans smiled. "That's beautiful, Daniel. That is called integrity. It's deeper than just telling the truth. It's living your truth." Daniel repeated the phrase softly, as if tasting each word, living your truth. He liked how it sounded, simple, calm, powerful. After the class, he walked home under a clear night sky. The air was cool, and the stars were bright. He looked up and said quietly, "I think I'm learning 2 languages at the same time, English and integrity." He smiled at the thought. He was learning to express himself not just in another language, but as another person, someone honest, open, strong, and calm. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel knew the next test would come, and it would not be simple. Because life always asks again, do you still choose to be honest? He didn't know when or how, but he was ready to keep walking that quiet path, the path of integrity. Morning sunlight fell softly through Daniel's window. He sat at his small desk, sipping tea and flipping through the pages of his English notebook. The room was quiet, just the sound of birds outside and the soft scratch of his pen on paper. He had been thinking about what Miss Evans said in class the night before, that integrity means living your truth. Those 3 words echoed in his mind. He whispered them again, slowly, living your truth. He smiled. I think that's what speaking English feels like for me, he thought. When I speak English, I try to be honest, to say what I really think, even if my words aren't perfect. That morning, at work, Daniel helped a new customer, a young man named Victor who needed flyers for a charity event. Victor spoke quickly, full of energy and passion. Daniel listened carefully, trying to understand everything. When he didn't understand a word, he asked politely, "Sorry, could you please repeat that?" Victor smiled, "Of course." They worked together easily. Daniel felt comfortable, not because his English was perfect, but because he wasn't afraid to admit when he didn't understand. Later that day, as Victor was leaving, he said, "Hey, your English sounds really natural. You're improving fast." Daniel laughed shyly. "Thank you. I'm trying." Then Victor said something that made Daniel pause. "You know, most people think speaking English means sounding smart. But really, it's about being clear and real. You have that." Daniel stood there quietly for a second. Being clear and real. Those words stayed with him. They felt connected to everything he'd been learning about honesty, integrity, and expression. That evening, Daniel opened his notebook again. He looked at all the sentences he had written over the past months. Some pages were messy, some full of mistakes, some almost unreadable. But as he looked, he smiled. Because those pages were a mirror of his journey. Every wrong sentence was a lesson. Every correction was a small act of truth, him saying, "I'm not perfect, but I'm learning." He whispered to himself, "When I speak English, I also learn who I am." He remembered his teacher's voice from the first class he ever took. She had said, "Language is a mirror. The way you speak shows who you're inside." At that time, he thought it was just a nice metaphor. Now he understood it deeply. When he used polite words, he was showing kindness. When he told the truth, he was showing integrity. When he listened carefully, he was showing respect. And together, these things were building not just his English, but his character. One night, Daniel sat by the window and decided to record himself speaking English. He wanted to see how much he had improved. He pressed the record button on his phone and started talking. "Hello. My name is Daniel. I work in a printing shop. I am learning English because I want to connect with people, to understand their stories, and to tell mine honestly." He paused. He could hear his voice shaking a little. But there was something beautiful about it, a kind of quiet truth. He continued, "When I speak English, sometimes I make mistakes. But I don't feel embarrassed anymore. Because speaking honestly is more important than speaking perfectly." He stopped the recording and listened. He smiled softly. His pronunciation was not perfect, but every word felt real. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Integrity is not only in actions. It's also in the voice. When I speak with honesty, I feel free." The next day, during lunch, Daniel sat with his coworker, Nina. She had been working there longer than him, and she often complained about their boss, about the customers, about everything. Today was no different. "Can you believe it?" she said. "He asked me to stay late again. I might just say I finished the work even if I didn't." Daniel looked at her and smiled gently. "I understand you're tired. But if we lie, we'll feel worse later." Nina sighed. "You and your honesty, Daniel. You really believe that doing the right thing always helps." Daniel thought for a moment before answering. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I think maybe it doesn't always help right away. But it helps us sleep better. It helps us trust ourselves." Nina looked at him, surprised by his calm tone. Then she laughed. "You sound like a teacher." Daniel laughed too. "Maybe I'm just practicing my English." But deep inside, he knew it wasn't just about language practice. It was about who he was becoming, someone who didn't just speak words, but lived by them. That evening, Daniel met Ms. Evans again for a short English walk-and-talk session in the park. She liked to make her students practice English while walking to make it feel natural, like real life. As they walked under the golden light of sunset, she asked, "So, Daniel, what did you learn this week? Not about grammar, but about yourself?" Daniel smiled. He thought for a few seconds, then said slowly, "I learned that when I speak English honestly, I feel stronger. Because I'm not pretending to be someone else. I'm just me." Ms. Evans nodded with a proud smile. "That's beautiful. Remember, integrity is not only about what you do, it's also about what you say and how you say it. Language and character grow together." They walked quietly for a while. The air smelled of trees and warm light. Daniel felt grateful for the lessons, for the words, for the journey itself. When he got home, he stood in front of the mirror. He looked at his reflection and spoke softly in English. "My words are my mirror. If I speak with truth, my reflection will be clear." He looked at himself for a long time, noticing how his eyes looked calmer than before, how his smile was small but certain. He realized that every time he spoke English with honesty, he wasn't only practicing pronunciation, he was practicing integrity. He whispered one last time before turning off the light, "When I speak truthfully, my words become my home." And in that quiet moment, Daniel understood something new, that integrity is not just about what you do when no one sees you. It's also about the words you choose when everyone is listening. It was a bright morning in early spring. The sky was soft blue, and the air smelled fresh after a light rain. Daniel walked to work as usual, passing the same bakery, the same little park, and the same man who sold newspapers on the corner. Everything looked ordinary. But that day, something unexpected was waiting for him at the printing shop. When he arrived, Mr. Carter was talking to a woman in a wheelchair. She had gentle eyes, a calm smile, and a folder full of papers on her lap. "Ah, Daniel," Mr. Carter said, "this is Mrs. Lane. She runs a small charity. She needs help printing some posters for a community event next week." Daniel nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." Mrs. Lane smiled warmly. "Nice to meet you too, Daniel. Mr. Carter told me you're good at design. I'd love your help." Her voice was calm but strong, the kind of voice that made you want to listen. There was something honest and peaceful about her presence. Daniel felt it immediately. As they discussed the poster, Daniel noticed how Mrs. Lane spoke. Every word she said was simple, but full of meaning. When she talked about her project, collecting food for families in need, her eyes shone with quiet purpose. She said, "I don't want people to feel like they're receiving charity. I want them to feel they're receiving kindness, human kindness." Daniel liked that. "Kindness," he repeated softly, as if testing how the word sounded in his mouth. Mrs. Lane smiled. "Yes, kindness. It's the only thing that never loses value." Daniel wrote the word kindness on his notepad. He didn't know why, but it felt important. Over the next few days, they worked together on the posters. Mrs. Lane came to the shop each morning, and they would sit at the computer, choosing colors, images, and words. She always spoke slowly, clearly, with gentle humor. Sometimes she would make mistakes, forgetting a word or mixing up expressions. Then she would laugh and say, "Oh dear, I've lived in this country for 20 years, and I still mix up words." Daniel laughed too. "You sound very natural," he said. "Your English is better than mine." She smiled. "Maybe. But what matters most is not perfect grammar. It's being true. If people can feel your heart in your words, they'll listen." That line touched Daniel deeply. It sounded like something Miss Evans would say. But hearing it from someone who lived it, someone who spoke truth through her actions, made it even stronger. One afternoon, while printing the last batch of posters, Daniel asked Mrs. Lane, "Can I ask you something personal?" She looked up with kind curiosity. Of course. He hesitated for a second. You always seem calm, honest, strong, even when things are difficult. How do you do that? Mrs. Lane looked at him quietly for a moment, then smiled softly. Well, she said, I wasn't always like this. Years ago, I worked in an office, busy, loud, stressful. One day, my boss asked me to hide a mistake we made on a client project. He said, don't tell anyone. It'll be easier that way. And I did what he asked. For weeks, no one knew. But every night, I felt heavy inside. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't smile. I felt like I was living with a secret. She paused and looked at Daniel. Do you know what I learned? Daniel shook his head slowly. She said, when you lie once, even a small lie, you start building a wall between who you are and who you want to be. And every lie adds another brick. Daniel listened carefully, the sound of the printer humming softly beside them. She continued, one night I decided I didn't want that wall anymore. So I told the truth. I lost my job. But I found my peace. Those words stayed with Daniel long after she left. He kept thinking about them, a wall between who you are and who you want to be. He wondered how many times he had built that wall in small ways, by pretending to understand something when he didn't, by hiding mistakes, by staying silent when he should have spoken. He realized that integrity was not just about big choices. It was also about small, daily honesty, with others and with himself. That night, he wrote in his notebook, every lie is a brick. Every truth removes one. I want to live without walls. The next morning, Mrs. Lane came again to pick up the finished posters. She looked at them carefully, then smiled. They're perfect. You did wonderful work, Daniel. Daniel smiled. Thank you. I learned a lot from this project. Oh, she said. What did you learn? He paused, thinking, then said, I learned that words are powerful. Not just printed words, spoken ones too. When they come from the heart, they can help people trust, connect, and change. Mrs. Lane's smile grew warmer. That's the most important lesson there is, she said. Keep speaking with that heart, and your English will never fail you. After she left, Daniel stood by the window of the shop. He watched her roll away slowly down the street, a quiet figure with sunlight shining on her shoulders. He thought about all the people he had met on his English journey, Miss Evans, his classmates, Victor, and now Mrs. Lane. Each of them had taught him something not from a book, but from their lives. He realized that learning English was never only about grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation. It was about connection, about finding truth between people through words. And maybe that's what integrity really is, not a rule, not a lesson, but a connection between your voice and your values. That evening, Daniel sat at his desk again. He turned on a small lamp and began writing sentences out loud for practice. I want my words to match my actions. I want to speak honestly. I want people to feel trust when I speak. He repeated each line slowly, letting the meaning touch him. He didn't rush. He didn't care about mistakes. He cared about truth. When he finished, he looked at his reflection in the dark window and whispered, maybe integrity is not something you have, it's something you speak. He smiled, closed his notebook, and turned off the light. Outside, the city was quiet again, but Daniel's voice, honest and clear, was beginning to sound like the voice of truth. The week after the charity posters were printed, things at the shop grew busier than usual. Orders came from schools, cafes, and new businesses. The old printer worked all day, humming like a tired machine that still had dreams to finish. Daniel stayed late every evening, checking colors, cutting papers, packing boxes. He didn't complain, he was proud of his work. But soon, a problem appeared. One Friday morning, Mr. Carter came in early, looking worried. He called Daniel to the back office. Daniel, he said quietly, we have an issue. A customer called and said some of their posters were printed wrong. The color's off, the text's blurry. Daniel frowned. I checked everything before we sent them. I know, said Mr. Carter. It's not your fault. The printer glitched again. He sighed and rubbed his forehead. But the client is angry. If we tell them the truth, we'll lose them. We can't afford that right now. Daniel stood still. So, what should we do? Mr. Carter looked at him carefully. Just tell them the posters were fine when we sent them. Say maybe they got wet in the rain or their lighting made the color look different. We'll fix it quietly later. But for now, just say that, okay? The words hit Daniel like a cold wave. He knew what Mr. Carter was really asking. He wasn't asking for help, he was asking for a lie. Daniel's heart began to beat faster. He didn't want to argue. He didn't want to lose his job. He needed the money, the security, the routine. And yet, inside him, something said no. He remembered Mrs. Lane's voice. When you lie once, you start building a wall between who you are and who you want to be. He remembered Ms. Evans' lesson. Integrity is living your truth. And he remembered his own words from the night before. Maybe integrity is not something you have. It's something you speak. Now he had to decide, would he speak it? He looked at Mr. Carter and said softly, Sir, I understand. But I think it's better if we tell the truth. If we say it's their fault and they find out later, we'll lose their trust. Mr. Carter's expression hardened. Daniel, don't be naive. This is business. Sometimes you have to protect yourself. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, I understand. But I also think protecting our honesty protects our business too. Mr. Carter sighed deeply, frustrated. You always want to be the good guy, don't you? Daniel stayed silent. He wasn't trying to be good. He was trying to be right. That evening, Daniel went home tired. He didn't feel peaceful this time. He sat by the window, listening to the sound of the city. The streetlights flickered. Somewhere far away, a train passed. He thought about what would happen if he refused. Maybe Mr. Carter would fire him. Maybe he'd lose everything he worked for. He looked at his notebook on the table. He opened it and read one of his older lines. Peace is better than money. He stared at those words. Did he still believe them? He closed his eyes and whispered, Yes, I do. The next morning, Daniel arrived at work early. He took a deep breath and went straight to Mr. Carter's office. Sir, he said calmly, I can call the client. I'll explain the problem. I'll tell them we'll reprint everything for free. It's better to be honest. Mr. Carter looked up from his desk, surprised. He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, You'd really do that? Even if it makes us look bad? Daniel nodded. I think it will make us look honest. Mr. Carter stared at him for a long time. Then he leaned back in his chair and sighed. All right. Do what you think is right. Daniel called the client. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. He explained what happened, the printing error, the color issue, everything. He ended with, We'll fix the order right away, no extra cost. There was silence on the phone. Then the client said, Thank you for being honest. Most people would just make excuses. We'll keep working with you because of that. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost in disbelief. When he hung up, Mr. Carter looked at him and said quietly, Well, that went better than I expected. Daniel smiled. Honesty always sounds better, sir. Mr. Carter chuckled. Maybe you're right. That evening, after everyone left, Daniel stayed behind to finish the reprint. The shop was quiet. Only the sound of paper rolling, the smell of ink, and the hum of the machine. He worked carefully, almost peacefully. For the first time in days, he felt light again. As he watched the new posters come out bright, clean, perfect, he whispered, Doing the right thing is not easy. But it feels clean. He thought about how many times he had used his voice to practice English and how now his voice was also practicing truth. Integrity was becoming part of his speech in English and in life. Later that night, Miss Evans called him unexpectedly. She wanted to know if he would join a weekend English storytelling workshop as a volunteer speaker. She said, "You have a calm voice, Daniel. I think students will feel safe listening to you." Daniel hesitated, nervous. But then he remembered what he'd just lived through, the fear, the choice, the truth. And he realized that real stories come from real life. So he said yes. On Sunday, Daniel stood in front of a small group of learners, people just like he used to be, shy, quiet, afraid of speaking. He smiled and said slowly, "Hello everyone. My name is Daniel. Today, I want to share something I learned. Integrity means doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when your voice shakes." He paused. The room was silent. Everyone was listening. He continued, "When I started learning English, I thought fluency was about speaking fast. But now I know fluency is about speaking truthfully. When your words come from honesty, people understand you, even if your grammar isn't perfect." He saw people nodding, smiling, some even taking notes. His heart felt warm. He realized he was not just teaching English. He was teaching something deeper, how to speak from the soul. After the session, one student came to him and said, "Your story helped me. I'm afraid to speak English because I always want to sound perfect. But now I'll try to be more honest instead." Daniel smiled. "That's where real fluency begins," he said softly. He walked home under the evening sky, the world glowing gold around him. He felt tired, but peaceful, the kind of peace that only comes from truth. And he knew, deep inside, that he had chosen the hard path, the right path, the path of integrity. After the storytelling workshop, Daniel's life felt brighter. He began to wake up each day with a small smile, a quiet purpose. He worked, studied English, helped customers, and sometimes still volunteered to speak. He didn't become famous or rich, but he felt something deeper. He felt peace. But peace doesn't mean life becomes easy. Sometimes it means learning to stay calm when things fall apart again. One cold morning in November, Daniel arrived at the shop as usual. He noticed the door was half open and the lights were off. Inside, boxes were stacked everywhere and the air smelled like dust and ink. Mr. Carter stood by the counter with a serious face. "Daniel," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something. The shop, it's closing. Next month." Daniel blinked. "Closing? Why?" Mr. Carter sighed heavily. "The rent went up. Sales went down. I tried, but I can't keep it running anymore." There was silence. The sound of a clock ticking on the wall felt louder than words. Daniel nodded softly. "I understand," he said. But inside, he felt something break, like a quiet crack in his heart. The following weeks passed slowly. The shop emptied piece by piece. The old printer, the one that had been his friend through many nights, was sold. Posters disappeared from the shelves. The hum, the laughter, the smell of paper gone. Daniel kept working until the very last day. He packed boxes, cleaned tables, and helped Mr. Carter with the final paperwork. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Some goodbyes are spoken through silence. On the final evening, the two of them stood together outside the shop. The sign above the door, Carter Printing, looked faded under the streetlight. Mr. Carter looked at Daniel and said, "You were the best employee I ever had. I didn't always agree with you, but you made me think." Daniel smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir. You taught me a lot too." They shook hands, not just as boss and worker, but as two people who had walked a hard road together. Then, Daniel watched as Mr. Carter turned off the lights for the last time. The small click echoed like the closing of a long chapter. That night, Daniel walked home slowly under the gray sky. It began to rain again, soft, cold, endless. He didn't run this time. He just walked, letting the rain touch his face, letting it remind him of that night months ago when everything began. He whispered to himself, everything ends. But what stays? He thought about the shop, the people he met, the lessons he learned. And the word came quietly, integrity. That one word had followed him everywhere. It had cost him comfort, but it had given him clarity. He had learned that sometimes integrity doesn't bring applause. Sometimes it just brings silence, a quiet, steady kind of peace. The next morning, Daniel sat by his window again with his cup of tea. The city outside was waking up. Cars passed. Birds sang. Life went on. He opened his notebook and began to write again, not for work, not for school, but for himself. He wrote, "Integrity is not loud. It doesn't shout. It whispers in the way you walk, the way you speak, the way you keep your word." He paused. Then he wrote another line. "Even when no one is listening, your honesty is still your language." He smiled as he read it. Because he realized something, his English had improved, but not just through studying words. It had improved because he had practiced truth through words. A few days later, he received a message from Ms. Evans. She wrote, "Daniel, one of the students from the workshop mentioned your story. They said your calm voice helped them believe they could change. Would you like to record a small podcast for our learners? Something simple, about honesty, or maybe integrity." Daniel's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He smiled gently. "Yes," he typed back. "I'd love to." He recorded the podcast at home, sitting near his window. The rain began again outside, just like that first night. He took a breath and started speaking slowly. "Hello, everyone. This is Daniel. Today I want to talk about something small, but powerful: integrity. You don't need to be perfect to have it. You just need to be honest, even when it's hard. When you make a mistake, say it. When you don't know something, admit it. And when you speak, mean what you say. Because language is not only about words, it's about the heart behind them." He paused, listening to the rain. Then he said softly, "When I first learned English, I wanted to sound like a native speaker. But now I understand being fluent means being sincere. Your real voice comes when you speak from truth." He smiled. "Thank you for listening." He stopped the recording. Silence filled the room. But it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. It was full of something invisible, something clean. It was integrity in silence. That night, before sleeping, Daniel looked out at the quiet city lights. He whispered the same question he once asked under the rain: "What does it mean to do the right thing when no one is watching?" And this time, he answered himself, "It means you are still watching, and that is enough." He turned off the light, smiled in the dark, and fell asleep, not with pride, but with peace. Weeks passed after the podcast. Daniel didn't expect much. He simply shared his story, his truth, his small piece of peace. But something unexpected happened. Messages began to arrive. First one, then 5, then dozens. People from different countries, Brazil, Japan, Egypt, India, and more, all wrote to him. They said, "I listened to your podcast before my exam. It calmed me. I was afraid to speak English, but your words helped me try again. You said honesty makes fluency. That changed how I think." Daniel read every message slowly, with quiet amazement. He had never traveled the world, but now his voice had. It had crossed oceans, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. One evening, Daniel sat on his balcony with a small notebook in his hand. He looked up at the night sky, wide and silent. He thought about the past months, the job, the mistakes, the fear, the choices, the rain. He thought about how much had changed, not outside, but inside. He began to write again, softly speaking the words aloud, practicing his English as he wrote them. Integrity starts as a choice. Then it becomes a habit. And finally, it becomes your voice. He looked at those lines and smiled. Because now he understood something he hadn't before, that language and character grow in the same way. Both begin small. Both need honesty, patience, and practice. Both are built, word by word, action by action. A few days later, Ms. Evans invited him to meet some new learners at the community center. They were beginners, nervous, shy, afraid of making mistakes. Daniel agreed to help. He walked into the room with a calm smile. He remembered his own first days, when his voice used to shake, when he was scared of every sentence. Now, he wanted to give these students the same feeling of safety that Ms. Evans had once given him. He said, "Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel. I used to sit where you are now. I was afraid too. But one day, I realized something important. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be real." The students listened closely. One of them asked shyly, "Teacher, what is more important, grammar or confidence?" Daniel smiled warmly. "Honesty," he said. "Be honest with your words. When you make a mistake, laugh. When you don't understand, ask. When you feel nervous, say it." Honest words always sound natural, even if the grammar is not. The room filled with small smiles, quiet laughter, and light. It was the sound of people learning not only English, but also courage. Later, Ms. Evans came up to Daniel and said, "You've grown so much. You used to study English to pass a test. Now you use English to touch hearts." Daniel laughed softly. "I didn't plan it," he said. "I just started speaking from truth." She nodded. That's the secret of fluency, when your words and your heart speak the same language. That night, Daniel walked home under the stars. The city felt alive, glowing softly in the dark. He didn't feel lost anymore. He felt connected. Every word he spoke, every choice he made, now had meaning. He whispered to himself as he walked, "Integrity is not just doing the right thing. It's being the same person in any place, in any language." He smiled at that thought. It felt simple, but true. At home, he made tea and played back his own podcast episode, the one about integrity. He listened quietly, noticing how his voice had changed. It sounded calmer, deeper, more sure. Not because his accent was perfect, but because his heart was clear. He realized something beautiful. The more honest he became, the more fluent his English sounded. Because honesty made his words flow naturally, without fear, without pressure, without pretending. He opened his notebook one last time that night and wrote, "Fluency is not speed. Fluency is freedom. And freedom begins with truth." He underlined that last sentence twice. Then he leaned back, looked out at the night, and felt grateful. He whispered, "Thank you for the hard days, for the lessons, for the silence." Because he knew that everything, every mistake, every fear, had been his teacher. And now, integrity wasn't just something he believed in. It was something he spoke, something he lived. Time passed. Daniel's life continued not with big changes, but with quiet strength. He didn't become rich or famous. He didn't win awards. But he lived with peace, the kind of peace that comes from knowing who you are. He still helped Ms. Evans with her English programs. He still practiced his language every morning, repeating simple sentences slowly, feeling every word. But now his English wasn't just a skill. It was a mirror of his character. It showed who he was inside. One day, as he sat near the window with his notebook, he wrote a short message for himself, and maybe for others, too. Your English is not just words. It is the reflection of your honesty, your patience, and your courage. He read those words slowly. And then he smiled because he realized they were true. That afternoon, Ms. Evans called him again. She said, "Daniel, I'm creating a new online series for English learners. It's about real stories and life lessons. Would you like to share yours? Daniel hesitated for a moment. Then he said, yes. But I don't want to make it about me. I want it to be about us, about how learning English can also teach us to live better. Ms. Evans smiled. That's exactly what people need. A few weeks later, Daniel stood in front of a camera for the first time. The room was quiet. The microphone was ready. He looked into the lens and imagined all the people listening, students in tiny apartments, workers on buses, mothers, travelers, dreamers, people who were trying, just like he had once tried, to find their voice in a new language. He took a deep breath, and he began to speak slowly, warmly, clearly, as if he were speaking to one friend. Hello, my friends. My name is Daniel. When I started learning English, I wanted to sound perfect. But the more I learned, the more I understood perfection is not the goal. Connection is. He paused, letting the words breathe. Each time you speak honestly, even with mistakes, you build a bridge between your heart and the world. That bridge is made of truth. He smiled gently and continued, when you practice English, don't only practice grammar or vocabulary. Practice being real. Practice listening with empathy. Practice speaking with kindness. Practice saying what you truly mean. He looked down for a moment, then said softly, I used to believe integrity was about big actions, telling the truth when it was hard, doing what's right when others didn't. And yes, that's part of it. But I also learned something simpler. Integrity lives in your small moments, in your tone, your patience, your respect. He smiled again, his voice calm and sure. When you speak English with honesty, you are not only improving your language, you are shaping your soul. The lights dimmed. The camera stopped recording. But Daniel stayed silent for a few moments, listening to the quiet air in the room. He felt peaceful, the same quiet peace that had followed him since that rainy night long ago. He packed his notebook, walked home, and watched the sunset paint the city gold. People passed by, strangers, faces he would never know. But he smiled at them anyway, because somehow he felt connected to every learner, every listener, every person trying to grow quietly, honestly. At home, he opened his notebook for the last time that day and wrote, Integrity and English, both are journeys. Both need practice. Both need patience. And both begin with small, honest steps. He closed the book and whispered, Keep walking. Keep speaking. Keep being true. The rain began to fall again, soft, like a song from the past. Daniel stood by the window, eyes closed, listening. He whispered one final line, a message for everyone who would one day hear his voice. Don't stop. Every quiet day of practice builds your future voice. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep moving forward. You're growing even when it's silent. The sound of rain continued, gentle, endless, peaceful. And with that sound, the story ended, not loudly, but truthfully. Because sometimes integrity doesn't shout. It simply speaks softly and never stops speaking.